Welcome in to DraftKings, the Slate. Brenden, Glasheen, Matt Meiselman is alongside today. Great to have you with us. We're talking a lot of football, reacting to the first Week 1 Sunday, which was yesterday. Then we want to look, Matt, we got to dive right into Week 2 because we have no patience at this point in the year. We're only 1 week into the season. I have no patience. I want to look at Week 2 spreads and get your knee-jerk reactions. We'll go rapid fire through all the Week 2 games after reacting to yesterday. And then we'll wrap things up with some Monday Night Football. It's weird to think there's only one Monday night game this year, opening week, and not a second Monday night game. So we're really going to put our arms around Ravens and Raiders to wrap up the program today. How are you?
Doing well. And yeah, like you said, we're going to do some rapid fire knee-jerk reactions. So to prepare for the show, I didn't look at anything. I'm ready to just see it for the first time, and then we're gonna have the reactions live on air.
So it's a real knee-jerk reaction. Like you're not giving it any thought, and that's kind of the whole point, right? It's just to get a gauge for how we feel going into the week. Because like the people, we're all gonna look at lines maybe later tonight, maybe already right this second. Sorry, and first thing tomorrow morning for sure. Folks are gonna take a look, see what they like, see what they don't like. Let's start with yesterday. We can use DFS, sports betting, whatever angle you'd like to take. I've got some thoughts as well, just storylines-wise. The NFC West was terrific yesterday. Aaron Rodgers, maybe you shouldn't have been running your mouth in July because that didn't look good yesterday. And I don't know, watching that football game last night, speaking of the NFC West, the Rams were great, but I look at the other team and I figure hashtag my time, Andy Dalton, just it doesn't look good anymore. What's your number one takeaway from yesterday?
I think it's the same as it is most years, where you just realized after Week 1, after all of the analysis and all the prep for the season, Week 1 happens, and then it's just like we didn't really know anything, right? Like we tried to convince ourselves we knew what was going to happen. Some of it's injuries, some of it's just fluky bad games, like Raheem Mostert with the injury. Like no one – obviously someone's going to get hurt every week in the NFL, but you don't know which guy it's going to be. So it's not like you're wrong if you thought Mostert would be good. And then there's like Brenden Ayuk not playing much, and some of that stuff you just don't find out from the coaches till it starts happening, and then they say it after the game. Those are always frustrating. So yeah, the takeaway is just like this is football, right? Week 1 happens, and it's like let's just recalibrate. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Week 2 is going to come up soon. We're already starting to analyze it, and Week 1's not even over yet. And let's find some new things to latch onto. But yeah, it's just like it was a surprising Week 1, I felt like, for a lot of reasons. But the Packers, I think, were the biggest one. Like, not that they lost, because it wasn't like they were massive favorites. They wound up being 3 or 4 point favorites, just the way that they lost. And they looked just so incompetent for the entire game.
They really did, right? And it was Aaron Rodgers didn't look completely comfortable. Jameis Winston throws for 5 touchdowns, didn't even hit 200 yards passing in that game yesterday. If there's one thing, and this is more of a DFS point of discussion, one thing that I think folks can feel good about, and when I say good about, a sure thing, Kansas City Chiefs on a main slate, you have to take a real solid look at considering a Kansas City stack. Is that fair? Because yesterday, looking at the $5 million contest, the $2.5 million Millie Maker, there's Travis Kelce, there's Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes was in one of those lineups that cashed big time and won folks a couple $1 million. You got to get those guys in there.
Yeah, the answer to that, I think, has a lot to do with how you're defining a stack. So if you're playing Mahomes, Kelce, and Hill together, part of the reason that you don't want to do that is because they're all going to be among the most expensive players at their positions every week. I think for the most part, they actually will be the number one salary guy at each of their respective positions every single week. For sure, Mahomes and Kelce, Hill's always up there, if not number one. So the problem when you play all three is that you get stuck playing the cheaper players that the rest of the field has. If you play Mahomes with just one on a weekly basis, that's a different thing. And I think most weeks generally, like, you have to look at Hill or Kelce, right? Like, even if that's not your primary stack, someone on the Chiefs is going to do well every week. They're just too good of an offense. So if you play, especially if you're playing a bunch of lineups, like not playing Hill or Kelce, that's problematic. So for me this week, like, I thought Kelce made a lot of sense because I didn't want to jump on the Kyle Pitts bandwagon that everyone was on. And the best way to play a different tight end is just to play Travis Kelce. He's the best one. I didn't really see the whole team blowing up the way they did. So that was a little surprising. But yeah, I mean, this is always an offense you have to consider. And even if they're popular, maybe you don't stack it when they're the chalk, but you just play one of the guys because someone's going to have a great game for the Chiefs almost every week.
So let's take a look now. We're going to go back and forth, everybody, from DFS to Sportsbook throughout the course of this show. We're going up until 6 o'clock. If you have questions, takes, we're into takes. If they're hot, give them to us. We understand that you might go get your advice elsewhere. We hope to give you some advice here as well, but this is a sounding board as well. So those of you watching on YouTube, those of you watching on Twitch, those of you that are watching on the DraftKings Twitter channel, drop a comment below. We'll try and get to it and get your feedback, and also look ahead to tonight's game, also week 2. We're reacting to yesterday. So to kind of get us started, here's one of the winning lineups from the $5 million fantasy football millionaire, Joe Burrow, the quarterback. We see a couple of Bengals in there, a Burrow-Higgins stack. I mentioned the $2.5 million contest. That had Mahomes in it. Kelsey's a mainstay in both of those. Tyreek Hill is in there. So that was a jumping off point looking at Kansas City. And you mentioned Brenden Ayuk, who didn't have anything yesterday. 0, zip, bagel, didn't provide anything. And what do you know? It's Deebo Samuel, who had a crucial mistake down the stretch. Folks who took San Francisco minus 8.5, we're not thrilled at Deebo, but overall DFS-wise at 5% owned, Deebo was a big fan of Deebo was BL Brown, 1994.
Yeah, this is an interesting lineup playing. Well, we can get to the Niners in a minute, but playing Joe Mixon as part of the stack. Normally, you see the stack quarterback with 2 pass catchers. This one has T. Higgins, but then also Mixon in there. I think the reason, like, if you would have showed me this lineup before the week, I would have said, wow, that's like a pretty chalky lineup, maybe except for Melvin Gordon. And then I think what happened as the week progressed is Sam Darnold got all this extra hype for that to be like the sneaky, cheap shootout game. Maybe it had to do with the Jets receivers, their lack of depth, that situation on the other side. So it made for an easy game to have run backs where you could play Darnold with Anderson or Moore. And then you could play one of those cheap guys on the Jets like Corey Davis. And then that became like the cheaper stack. And Joe Burrow came in at 3%, which I think most people expected more. So, yeah, there just ended up not being a ton of Bengals stacks. Obviously, we see their T. Higgins 12 to 13%. But Deebo was really the difference maker. Like, a lot of people had Hill, a lot of people had Higgins. Deebo was 5%. And personally, like, I was really high on the Niners for this week 1 because of the matchup. And sometimes you get these big spreads where it's like, yeah, they're just going to get the lead and sit on the ball and be able to run the whole second half. But the Lions are such a bad defense. Like, if the Niners have to pass for any reason, they were going to do well. So, like, I thought it would be Jimmy G with Deebo with Ayuk. That was kind of where I was leaning, with Hawkinson on the other side. And that, like, only sort of worked. You really needed to not play anyone from the Niners except Deebo Samuel to have a shot. So, yeah, this is like a pretty well-constructed lineup. And I think getting the Bengals lower owned than maybe they were expected to be was really the key here.
Are you concerned at all about an Ayuk? And of course, I know that question comes off like an overreaction, but are you concerned, or is that just a situation where I know Lance did come in for a couple of throws? Actually, it might have just been the one throw for the touchdown.
Yeah.
Are you concerned that Jimmy Garoppolo, it was just a day where he found the open man and there was the safety over the top covering Brenden Ayuk?
Well, Ayuk didn't play that many snaps.
He was in. Oh, right. He was injured too.
Yeah, he only played about half the game on offense, which I guess we only found out was an actual thing afterwards. So I don't know. Like, these situations are so hard to read. Maybe you have a better take on them than I do. But like, when a guy is supposed to be a starter, doesn't play as much as we're expecting, and then what do you do the next week? You know, maybe he'll just return to his normal role. And it would be a better indicator for Ayuk if they had lost the game, because then it's like, all right, now we need to get back on track, get our guy in there, play his normal reps. The Niners put up 41 points though, so it's not like they need to do better, at least offensively.
Sure. We have some questions coming in about tonight's game. We will be sure to get to them. I see Cena is in here asking about Mark Andrews as a potential captain's play. Just to give the people a favor here. Do you want to answer that question now for the sake of for Cena's time? Not Mark Andrews' time. Mark Andrews has plenty of time. Cena's time.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll dive deeper into the showdown a little bit later. I think Andrews is maybe it'll be a little too popular as a captain. We can get into it more later. Like, I don't think he's a terrible player or anything, but I kind of am leaning towards wanting to just play the quarterbacks as captain and then maybe get contrarian elsewhere, because I think Lamar is going to be able to have a lot of success rushing tonight.
Here's another DFS question I have about yesterday. You mentioned Mixon, Melvin Gordon's in that winning build. Is a day like yesterday a reminder that you don't need the stud running back? How do you go into a slate and figure, how do you make the case like this particular user did? All right, I'm not going to go to a McCaffrey. I'm not going to go to a Dalvin Cook. How do you feel, or an Alvin Kamara? How do you make that call?
So I don't actually know that call comes directly, because now that I'm seeing this again, Hill and Kelsey are in there without the quarterback, which is probably the strangest part of the lineup, actually, to play the two stud pass catchers on a team without their quarterback. They essentially stacked two different teams here, the Chiefs and the Browns. Yep. So it's more just like you're prioritizing other people first, and then you get to running back and you can't afford them. I wouldn't say as a general rule you don't need the stud running back. It's true you don't need them if you play Tyreek Hill and he goes for 40 points. Like, then you don't need the stud running back. So it's more about just like which high-end position gets there. Does the receiver have the huge day like Hill did, or does the running back have the huge day? And just coincidentally, for whatever reason, in week one, none of the running backs were that great. McCaffrey had a good game, but none of them hit their ceiling outcomes like Tyreek Hill did. So I think it was more just a product of week one, and we shouldn't read too much into that going forward.
If any of you in the comments section want to give us who your go-to play was yesterday that helped you win, some differentiation that gave you a benefit in a particular contest, let us know. We'll be sure to get to it, shout it out. On the sportsbook side of things yesterday, the underdogs were 11-4 against the spread. You're preaching sense on Twitter, right? At preaching sense, Matt Meiselman? Okay.
That is me.
That's good. Brenden Glasheen here as well. Be sure to check us out there, covering all things DraftKings and the DK Sportsbook. What'd you make of the underdogs yesterday, taking care of business, 11-4 against the spread?
So generally, I think like if you just bet underdogs for the course of the season, they might win a little more often than the favorites. But we're talking numbers like 50.1% or 50.2%. Like, there's no expectation for the underdogs to do this well. So I think to a large degree, it's just a fluke. I mean, if you look at some of the games too, like the Lions backdoor cover, they had no business pulling that off. And if you got the Niners at the early number, actually, if you had the -7 or 7.5, it didn't matter. You actually still covered with the favorite. But yeah, there were just some crazy things that happened. And like the Packers game too, we talked about. I don't think that it has predictive value going forward. And I also wouldn't say, like, this is the concern I have where people might take this the wrong way. Don't go and just bet the favorites in week 2 because it'll bounce back. These things have nothing to do with each other.
Once again, Matt Meiselman has not looked at the week 2 lines, the latest lines at least, on the DraftKings Sportsbook. We're going to give you lines from like a couple hours ago, because sometimes when we show you the Sportsbook live, they disappear because news comes in. And speaking of, before we move to week 2, there is news coming out today. You could even look at yesterday. This next, we're segueing here to just talk storylines from yesterday. I have some thoughts on the Packers, if those of you want to stick around for that. I'll be sure to get into that. I already teased off the top. Get Andy Dalton, get out of here. Put the kid in. Let's go. Rip the Band-Aid off. The NFC West is awesome. It took 1 week for them to deliver. That was excellent. An excellent day for that conference, that division yesterday. Oh, Aaron Rodgers. Anyway, but how about the news of Taylor Heinicke starting this week, but more importantly, because we all love Ryan Fitzpatrick and what he means to us this early in the season, the month of September. It's a bad break. You mentioned Mostert, some of this injury news, Jerry Jeudy, any one of those. Does one stand out more than others?
I really don't think any of them are incredibly relevant. I think Jeudy might actually be the biggest there. So the Ryan Fitzpatrick thing, it's tough because I like him as a fantasy quarterback. I think a lot of other DraftKings contributors like him as both a fantasy quarterback and a real-life quarterback. I think he's a fine real-life quarterback, but it's not like he's had some amazing career. He's had moments. And Taylor Heinicke is surely a downgrade to some extent, but it's not like their season's over. So I wonder if this might be a little overblown. Like Washington last year, they weren't good because, well, they weren't that good of a team anyway. They just played in a terrible division mostly. Right. Like they had a decent season. but they were carried by defense. They were carried by skill players, Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, even Logan Thomas. I don't know that quarterback matters that much on that team. So like Judy as an up and coming receiver may actually matter more. But I think it's tough to say. And then with the Niners with Mostert, like running backs, I mean, I don't know if it's new information to say that running backs are generally interchangeable. So not as concerned about that one.
Kyle Shanahan announcing Mostert chipped cartilage in his knee, headed to IR, should be about 8 weeks. The latest on Ryan Fitzpatrick, 6 to 8 weeks out with a hip injury. That's from Adam Schefter. And the Jerry Jeudy news, Vic Fangio spoke to the media today in Denver. And the takeaway there, multiple weeks, high ankle sprain. Adam Schefter putting a timetable on it. It's 4 to 6 weeks. So things to monitor there. Serious stuff with Jerry Jeudy, Raheem Mostert, Ryan Fitzpatrick. We will get to those lines in week 2 in just a moment. So, and we start with Thursday Night Football because it's Washington and the Giants. So we got to look at Taylor Heineke as the starting quarterback very quickly in this NFL season. However, Matt Meiselman, I must say, it's real funny. When Aaron Rodgers in the offseason's reminding everybody of his MVP status and how he, his replacement was drafted early on and they don't put enough help around him. He's upset with management. Fine. All fair arguments, right? So he makes a big fuss about it in the offseason. Okay, fine. You want out? You're using your leverage. Totally understand. You go out and look like that week 1. You go out and look like that. So I'm really curious. Who's to blame for that, Matt Meiselman? Who's to blame for how the Packers looked and how flat they looked yesterday in Florida? They weren't even in New Orleans. The game might as well have been inside that dome in New Orleans because that, my friend, was a joke of a performance. A joke. So is it an overreaction to say their season's over and they're in trouble? Yes, that's an overreaction. However, the dude, I don't know if you caught some of this before the game. The guy loves to talk, loves to hear himself talk too. One of those guys. He had some stuff to say to Aaron Andrews pregame. He puts a lot on his shoulders for a guy that says he needs more help. I think he kind of likes not having a lot of help and winning games and winning MVPs. And then when it comes time to cash in, it didn't look very good there. Number 1 seed at home against Tampa Bay. I'm just saying, they're going to be fine. That division's not good enough for anyone else to jump above them. So sorry to the Vikings, Lions, and Bears fans. I don't know how you look at this guy and just go, a little unlikable to me.
I mean, you do sound like a Tom Brady fan talking a little bit. I don't know if that's the reason. Maybe it is. But no, I don't disagree. It was like a truly pathetic week 1 game. And yeah, I think I'm with you just that it matters and it's embarrassing and it's like it'll be fun to poke fun at for a week or 2 or 3. And then at some point, Aaron Rodgers is going to start doing a lot of the stuff he did last year and we'll just forget about this whole thing. But by that time, maybe they're not in the playoffs. Like maybe they just have lost a couple games because the football season just isn't very long, right? So like if you come out slow and you're 0-3, that could be it. You're just done. So it's a big deal just because we have 17 games now, so it's not quite as bad as the 16 games, but still it's a short season and 1 loss does matter. But I don't have a reason for like why they were bad. Like that's really hard for me. So maybe you have a better idea of what went on there.
It's not a X's and O's take. They just looked flat.
Yeah.
They just look flat, man. And I really think they believed that there's no way New Orleans was there was no way New Orleans having to play a neutral site home game. Well, it was a neutral site, but technically it was a home game for the Saints. There was no way the Saints could put up enough points to overtake the Packers. They were down 17-3 at halftime. And then Aaron throws that pick. They have a chance to make it a 1-score game. Aaron throws that pick deep in Saints territory. Just there was a lot of self-inflicted stuff. And to me, it starts with him. It just does. And look, they're in a soft landing next week. Monday night, home against Detroit. I mean, come on. They're in a good spot to bounce back and erase any discussion from what that looked like. But it just not great. And I think anytime they lose this year, I'm curious what kind of attitude he'll have because they had a lot of great moments last year. So
I'm disappointed that you just said they're on primetime because I didn't know that for sure. I would have loved to play Aaron Rodgers this week against the Lions. That's like the perfect bounce back spot. And Jeff Okudah is going to be out for the season. So like the one prospect in the Lions secondary that he probably would have been tasked with covering Devontae Adams. That's a pretty good bounce back spot. Like if he's not good in that game, then we can start sounding the alarms for sure.
No question. Before we move on, anything else that you've want to get off your chest from yesterday? Just being a fan of the NFL?
I don't know. I was watching all the games at the same time, kind of like everyone else was, and it's such a blur. Like it was so cool to have it back, but I don't feel like I was emotionally ready for like how fast it all comes at you, right? Like
it's so true.
It's 12:58 and you're like, all right, here we go, and then it's 1:03 and you're like, what's going on? Like I don't even know what's happening anywhere.
So I root for the Patriots too. Folks think I'm a Brady guy, which I am, but Patriots, I was actually kind of thrilled the Patriots were on at 4:30 because like all that 1 o'clock stuff, I'm just like, whoa, it's overwhelming. So if you root for a team and your team played at 1 o'clock, I don't know how you processed all of it. Yeah, it was a lot. CJ71 has a question about week 2. We'll take this question and then we're going to go into the spreads for week 2. Too high, too low, just right. We're going to go through all 16 games for week 2. And Matt Meiselman is going to give us his knee-jerk reaction to the spread. We're just talking spread. But before we do that, CJ71 wants a hidden, which will become unhidden, as hidden sleeper, Matt Meiselman, for week 2 DFS.
Oh man. Okay. So there could be a bunch of these, right? Like guys who were not good, but now are going to be overlooked because they're coming off really bad games. Like I feel like you could come up with a dozen of these. But I'm just kind of scrolling the pricing here to see where it might pop up. You know what? I don't know if he'll be a sleeper, but Mike Davis was reasonably popular in week 1 and was not good. He actually started very strong in the first half and then the whole Falcons offense fell apart. The Falcons in general might be that sleeper team, but again, like they may just get traction because their pricing is still a little bit low, but Mike Davis is still, I think his pricing is down to 5,500. That's too low for him. And if he's only 15% owned again, like I think that qualifies as sleeper play if he's only like secondary chalk. I'm sure if we had more time to look through this, I could come up with other guys that are like 1, 2, or 3% owned that are super sleepers, but I'll call this one a shallow sleeper, not a deep sleeper.
Okay, the moment of the show, because Matt Meiselman. A couple other things I got to get off my chest here. We need to know what's behind the shade.
It's a couple trees behind a window and maybe a few locks. There might be some locks hiding there.
That's what I said. Maybe he's got the secret sauce for tonight's Monday night game between the Ravens and the Raiders. Maybe.
There's just a bunch of numbers on a whiteboard. It's an algorithm of some kind, maybe a few of them. Yeah, it's just no one's paying enough. I'm not getting paid enough to show that yet.
I like it. I really do. Also, before we keep going, I saw your tweet. Do you sleep with the tape on your mouth? You do that?
Yes, I do.
That's amazing.
That's awesome that you're bringing that up. So Tony Reale publicized this.
Yes.
Yeah. No joke. I actually do what he's doing.
And you sleep through the night when you do that?
Oh yeah. And I used to not. And the tape fixes everything. I would say to people, this is what I say whenever health advice, anything in that, and this is a very strange version of health advice. Anything like this, you try it once or twice and you just see if it works, right? Like you don't have to commit. You can mess up one night of sleep. It's not the end of the world. People pull all-nighters for weirder reasons. Maybe not. Maybe taping your mouth shut is a weirder reason. But yeah, it helps me sleep. Just like everything that Tony Reale said in that clip. And if you haven't seen it, just search on Twitter Tony Reale mouth tape. It was on a segment of Around the Horn. Just listen to how he explains it. I think he got it 100% right.
Yeah, I watched it and I was like, wow. I don't think I snore, but sometimes I might. So I'm thinking about it. And
just film yourself sleeping and then find out.
And
That's
I breathe,
how you know, right?
Well, and I breathe a lot through my mouth. I need to be breathing through my nose more. It's true. It's healthier for you. Anyway, just had to get off that off my chest when I found out I was working.
This is a great tangent.
Yeah,
I like it.
I got to give you credit for give it a chance. Okay, here we go. So the Sportsbook, DraftKings Sportsbook, all odds and lines are brought to you by the DK Sportsbook. Of course, here on the Slate, brought to you by DraftKings. Matt Meiselman has not looked at these yet. So we're going to go rapid fire. And of course, give some reasoning, please. Like you don't have to just give a pick, move on, but keep it brief. We're going to go game by game for week 2, starting Thursday night, and we're going to get a gauge of how we feel about just the spread. We're going to do spread only, because if we try to pick apart everything from each game, we could be here for a bit. So let's, without further ado, and then after that, we're going to get you ready for Monday Night Football, okay? So stick with us for that. And we have news to apply here, as I guess we're getting a trade. A trade has just come in from Ian Rappaport. We'll bring that up when we get there. Let's go. Here we go, Meiselman. Week 2 begins Thursday in our nation's capital. The Giants are at the football team. Washington -3 with Taylor Heineke as the starter.
So, yeah, my first reaction here is that this line only would have been a point or two higher if Fitzpatrick were the quarterback, kind of confirming what I was saying, that I don't think this is that big of a downgrade because Fitzpatrick is not great. He's an exciting average quarterback, if that makes sense. So, yeah, this line seems about right. And if Fitzpatrick were starting, Washington would probably be like -5 or so. And in that scenario, that probably would be about right, too. I'm going to think most of these lines are approximately fair. I'm guessing. Now they're kind of like on the screen, but I'm trying to, keep it blurry so I don't spoil it. But yeah, that's like I think that line for sure it seems about right.
Okay, this has moved a half point the other direction. This was 3.5. Now it's 3. So this has moved quite a bit since we started, since 3 o'clock this afternoon. I'm with you. This feels just about right. Let's go to Patriots-Jets. Patriots 0-1. Jets are 0-1. This ball game is at MetLife. Jets are getting 5.5.
It seems slightly high. And if there's a trend to look at, it's the team that lost. Although both these teams lost, right? So there's nothing too much to read into that. But the home underdog generally might just be a bit undervalued if there's like a kind of a theme. I would have thought we'd see 6, and maybe the fair line is like 4.5, but this seems about right.
Yeah, this doesn't feel large enough to me. I think the Jets played okay against Carolina, and the Patriots, they play calling wise, I think they're going to open it up even more next week. I think their play calling was super conservative from Mac Jones. He looks like he can play. He can make the throws. There is news on the Patriots. Trent Brown is dealing with something, and that's important because they did not. Now, look, they had 4 fumbles in the game, so that's a problem in and of itself. But as far as protection, the Trent Brown news is not good. He's the right tackle for the Patriots, and I know it's not the same as the left tackle in passing formations, but the right tackle for what they're trying to establish running the football is important. Adam Schefter, Trent Brown, minor calf strain, will be considered day-to-day. He left after the opening series. And after that, their opening drive, they ran the football well. So something to keep in mind. If the Patriots, but then again, I think they're going to open it up and try to throw the ball a little bit more, maybe on 1st and 2nd down. So I think it's probably just about right, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Patriots win by a touchdown. Let's go to Saints. Panthers. Saints are a 3.5-point favorite coming off that win and covering, of course, against the Packers. The Panthers, as we just discussed, beat the Jets.
So the Saints are a good contender for most overvalued team heading into week 2 after the week 1 they just had. Like, I think good rule of thumb is be cautious of teams that had great first weeks. So this line being a little more than a field goal seems a bit high. Like, I would have thought 2.5 or so, but it's not off by much, if anything.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just about right. I really do. I think it's just about right. The books are not overreacting to the blowout win and seeing Jameis with 5 touchdowns. Carolina, look, Sam Darnold played well also in his first game. We found out, is Kenny Ducey there? Yes, Kenny, it was a Jets problem. It was a Jets problem for Sam Darnold, not a Sam Darnold problem. So I think that's just about right. Just about right. Carolina's okay. Carolina's interesting to me. They are. Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. They are on the road again in week 2. They are at Philadelphia. The Eagles with a really nice performance against the Atlanta Falcons. The Eagles are getting 3.5 at home. They're a home dog. Home dog. What do you feel?
I would have thought the Eagles would have gotten more respect for their week 1 win. I think this line probably is about right. I'm surprised that it's right, though, is really the takeaway here. Like, I would have thought you could get value on the Niners at a shorter line after the Eagles dominated the Falcons in a game where it was more like the Falcons just messed up and the Eagles. I mean, that's a feel thing, right? That's not like really an objective take. But the Niners also kind of almost gave the game away in the second half. Right. And I would think like recency bias there where people saw that and it's like, wow, the lines almost came back. The Niners are in trouble. But the line seems right. Like, I don't think any of that was actually accounted for in the point spread.
So it feels too low to me because say the score, that score in Detroit held and it was 38-10, your final score. I think maybe DK Sportsbook gives a little more love to the Niners. And let's not look. I also think Atlanta is not. I don't think Philadelphia is all that much better than the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons did not look good. I think this is a case of the book reading a little too much into how Philly looked against an Atlanta team that's got a new coach and some new system with the new coach being there. No Julio Jones. Clearly, that was an adjustment for kind of washed up Matt Ryan. But the Niners, they didn't finish the game well, but they were a dominant football team yesterday. However, as you mentioned, it's Detroit. How much do we really consider? I would say the same thing, though, about Philadelphia. How good is Atlanta? Atlanta's a team that I feel has to be a more second-half football team in how they finish as opposed to how they start. So I like the Falcons yesterday. I was wrong on that one. Jalen Hurts can kind of play. So I think this is a little low. I'm surprised the Niners are not a larger favorite in this game. Let's move down the list. We go to a division game. Buffalo and Miami. This game is in Miami. Buffalo, a week 1 loss. I got to scroll back up, I think. A little bit more. There we go. Thanks, Andrew. We have Andrew, by the way, and Eamon behind the scenes today. We continue. Week 2, spreads, reaction. Buffalo at Miami, Matt Meiselman. Buffalo is a 3-point favorite.
Okay. This one, I think I probably would have expected to see a 4 there instead of a 3, but like this is pretty close too. It's just the Bills. The Bills did play very poorly against the Steelers, and I think that they might be getting dinged a little bit too much for that game. They should be one of the better teams in the NFL this year, and one game isn't really going to discourage me that much. So I think this is just about right, but like maybe a little bit low there. What do you think?
It's a little low also. I think it's a little low. It surprised me how Buffalo looked in week 1. Now, I know the Steelers are that's as healthy we're going to see Pittsburgh all year. Right? They had a running game, Big Ben, the in-shape Big Ben, the 15-pound less Big Ben that we heard at least. He looked good. He looked good. Okay. He looked okay physically yesterday as far as how he looked. But that's as healthy we're going to see Pittsburgh all year. And that's classic Pittsburgh. Buffalo, I was a little surprised because they did play a lot of the starters, including Josh Allen, played a lot of preseason games. And I only read into that because I felt they would be ready to go from the shoot. They're at home. Kind of a letdown spot. I think Pittsburgh was a little disrespected based on that 6.5-point line. Like you mentioned, I wouldn't read. I think Miami, like Tua made plays yesterday when he had to. They went to that Wildcat stuff yesterday in Foxborough to kind of bail him out. They went to Jacoby Brissett at times. I thought it was a little cute, but Brian Flores can clearly coach. And that's going to be said a lot this year. Like, the fact that Brian Flores, an extension of Belichick, he might be one of the Belichick guys now. And we've had a couple of years to look at this situation now in Miami. Brian Flores can coach. So I think he can scheme it up against Josh Allen. He had success against Josh Allen a couple years ago. As much as I think Buffalo is a far superior opponent, it's a division game. It's on the road. It feels just about right. I wouldn't have been surprised, though, if this was at 4 or 5 points. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes that way. I'm curious as to see what the handle and the percentage of the bets are as the week continues. We move down to the next game. The Rams, after a nice win. Matthew Stafford looks good in his debut for the Rams on Sunday Night Football. They are in Indianapolis. So the Colts, they had to deal with the Seahawks in week 1. Now they've got the Rams coming in. It's the Colts are getting 4.5 points, Matt.
So we haven't done one of these yet. I think the spread's pretty fair, but the total actually seems kind of low to me. Like, I think there's potential for a shootout. The Colts seem to throw the ball pretty well at times during the Seattle game. It was a little inconsistent with Carson Wentz, but I think the Rams are going to be a pretty good offense. The fact that this game is in a dome in Indianapolis will help. So maybe this total should be closer to 50. The spread, though, that seems about right to me at 4.5.
Okay. This to me, and I'm like you, I haven't really given these much of a look either. So this is just knee-jerk reaction. I think folks are making way too much out of this Colts team. And I know that's going to hurt CEH's feelings. CEH good friend from the Madden Sims. He's in the YouTube chat right now. And thank you all for being here with us. We're going to get to some of your questions and showdown strategy, also some betting analysis of tonight's Monday night game, Baltimore at Vegas. I feel I'm not a big this is a hard one for me because I think the Stafford to LA thing has been so overhyped, but I also think the Colts have been a team that's been super overhyped. I will admit I was impressed. I was really impressed. Sean McVay could open things up. Stafford was elusive. He opened up the pocket. He elongated the pocket. Cooper Kupp was one of his favorite targets last night. I thought Woods would be more of his guy, but it was more of a Cooper Kupp night for the Rams. I think this wouldn't have shocked me if it was at 5.5, even like 6 points. I really believe that. Like Indy to me reeks of overrated. They really do. I think that the Carson Wentz, Frank Reich marriage. I know they've got some really good players in that front seven defensively. It's a great offensive line. I think this should be a larger differential. I'm surprised the Rams aren't larger favorites here. Let's go to Texans and the Browns. So these next couple, there are some big point spreads here. Browns are 12.5 point favorites at home against Houston, who just smoked Jacksonville.
These next couple, yeah, you mentioned they're big spreads, but like I think there are a couple games here where we're probably going to see some lines that maybe we disagree with more heavily than the ones that we saw, like the ones we've been through already. This one seems about right though. The Texans are going to be hard to read because did they play well or did Jacksonville just play bad?
Yeah.
We don't really know. We do kind of know what the Browns are, though. They played a Chiefs team that was the same as last year, basically. The Browns team is basically the same as last year. So we have a much larger sample on what they are. They're probably an above average, but not great team. The Texans could be slightly below average. They also could be absolutely horrible. Like they might have just had one lucky game and they're, maybe the worst team in the NFL. I just don't think we know that yet. So having this line like between the 10 to 14 range, that feels like where it should be, whether it should be 12.5, 11, 13, whatever. Not really sure, but yeah, somewhere in this range seems fine to me.
So overall, I'm with you. And what I would say to play devil's advocate, and this is something I had to remind myself a bit watching that game a bit yesterday. Say what you want about the Texans. Say what you want about the organization. The Deshaun Watson situation, never mind his request football-wise to get out of Houston, right? But also just off the field, that's a whole story of its own, right? But I think we have to remind ourselves, they do have some really solid NFL players on that roster. Like, they're not a great team, but Laramie Tunsil is a solid pro. Brandon Cooks probably doesn't get enough credit for what he is as a receiver, because he always kind of gets hurt in like big spots and he kind of, disappears in big games. But they do have some play. And Danny Amendola was a threat yesterday after he was just signed off the street. And folks are probably watching that game like, Danny Amendola is a Houston Texan?
I had that reaction. I had no idea he was on the team until he was standing in the end zone with the ball. That's basically how it went down. No, I think you're right. And actually, just a quick thing on this, and it'll get to the next game too, because we've got Jacksonville next on the list.
Yep.
But when we saw the Colts injury news coming through, I think a lot of people were like, okay, let's take the Titans to win the division. And on the DK Sportsbook futures betting splits, the Titans, I think, next to the Giants, and that's probably just like New Jersey bias maybe, but next to them, the Titans were the most bet on team to win their division this year. And I was reluctant, not because I think the Colts are good, but because I think there's a chance that either Jacksonville, which doesn't look as likely, or Houston could just like have a randomly decent season. I didn't bet either of them, regretting it now, but like Houston was, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 to 1 to win the division before the year. And they're probably into the single digits already just from a good week one where the Titans look really bad.
Right. And so I'm not telling you the Texans are good and they're going to be great. And I know that's not what you're saying either, and even like Tyrod Taylor, like freak accident last year. He's a pro. He's done this a couple times now where he goes into a situation. Now in this case, we don't know who their next quarterback is. I forget the dude they drafted in the second or third round. I'm drawing a blank on his name. That's not important. Point being is Tyrod Taylor understands, like, this is a temporary role. I'm going to make the most of my opportunity. These guys aren't just going to go out there and throw in the towel. They've got ready-made pros. Davis Mills. Thank you, Eamon. Davis Mills, the quarterback they drafted in the mid round section of the draft. So just keep that in mind. Like, the Texans do have some pros on this team. Guys do have contracts. Guys do want their next contracts. They might want to play well to say, hey, can you come trade for me and get me out of here? So that's just something to think about. It's a pretty big number. But Cleveland was ready to play against Kansas City. Let's go to the next one. We still have a lot to get to. Denver and Jacksonville as we move down the list here. Denver is in Jacksonville, and the Jags are getting 6. Nice performance by Denver on the road in Jersey there, Matt.
So this of all games, I haven't seen the rest of them yet, but at least to this point, this line seems the most off to me because I think this is the best example we have from week 1 of a team who way overperformed facing a team who way underperformed. And it's going to be a work in progress for Jacksonville. They're a really young team, Trevor Lawrence, obviously. And Denver just kind of got the benefit of playing the Giants. And I don't know how good they are. Like, to me, the Broncos are most likely a slightly above average team, and the Jaguars are a slightly below average team. And with the Jaguars having a home game, which I guess we can debate how much home field advantage matters team by team. Like, it's not exactly the same for every team. You go into Pittsburgh, it's a little bit different than going into Jacksonville on the road. But even so, home field advantage is still relevant. And like, I would have thought this game would be a field goal or less. So I'm kind of surprised by this one.
Okay. Same. I thought Denver looked really good. I also think Teddy Bridgewater reminded also yesterday, while it was one game, as long as he stays healthy, he makes good decisions. So moving on, I'll start with this one. Bengals are getting 3 in Chicago. With Andy Dalton as the starting quarterback, I love the Bengals. This should be the revenge game, though.
Come on, you gotta factor in Andy Dalton against the Bengals. Like, that's got to be a thing.
Oh God, that's right. The revenge narrative. I mean, he threw a pick in the end zone yesterday. I'm like, that is just, how does Matt Nagy not make that change? Matt Nagy is just buying himself time. And I like Matt Nagy. I actually think he doesn't get enough credit for what he did with Mitchell Trubisky. Folks forget about that. But with Joe Burrow on the other side, how does Nagy might look at it and go, this Bengals offense can play to keep up. They have to play with a lead. If they go down early, it would not surprise me if they go to the kid. They might be that willing to pull the plug on Andy Dalton. If they don't get a lead early, I wouldn't shock me. I think they're gonna start feeling it. And it's a home game for Chicago. 1:00, they'll be ready to go. Some afternoon Diet Cokes, as one of our friends here, Tommy Freeze Pops, likes to say, Diet Cokes. Yeah, the Boo Birds will be out fast.
Yeah, and I guess I'm reading this. You know what? Even just thinking about it again, like, this actually is a scenario like the previous game where Dalton was terrible, the Bears looked terrible, and the Bengals actually had a surprise upset win at home against the Vikings. So initially, I would probably have thought, like, okay, we're going to get the Bears undervalued now, but it actually looks like it's priced in. They're field goal favorites. Do you think that's where they deserve to be? Because I would have expected that I would have liked the Bears if it were a pick'em game, but it's not.
It's not, right? That's why I like the Bengals.
Yeah.
We got to be quick these next couple, and then we got to move on to tonight's game. So let's just give a yes or no. And sorry for folks that were looking forward to their teams being called out here. Vegas, we'll find out what Vegas looks like tonight. They're in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's losing 6.
Yeah, that seems probably about right. But yeah, we'll see how the Raiders look. So not as much to say there anyway. Could
certainly change based on how we what it looks like tonight. Another 12.5-point favorite. It's Tampa. Tampa home to Atlanta.
Yeah, this feels about right too. I don't think the Bucs will be as good as last year, but they're still going to be one of the best teams in the league. The Falcons, I'm sure, will be better than they were in week 1, but this being a big spread, obviously not a surprise.
Okay, last couple here. Dallas is in LA. The Chargers are 3-point favorites against Dallas.
The Chargers looked decent against Washington on the road. Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like, I hear your skepticism that this line is this high and maybe it should be a little bit less than a field goal. Yeah, I think I'm with you that it seems slightly high.
I take the points for Dallas. Dak Prescott looked good, and they got 10 days of rest in LA. So this whole West Coast trip thing, I mean, I know they're in Dallas, not really an East to West Coast team, but they're in Tampa, then they're going to LA. But yeah, I think Dallas should be enough. Dak was comfortable enough where I'm in. Next 3. Tennessee in Seattle. Seahawks are losing 5.5.
This feels a little high. I feel like Tennessee was probably overrated before week 1, and now they're going to be underrated after week 1 just from one really bad game. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it. And Seattle, I think probably appropriately thought of by most people. Like, they were expected to beat the Colts, and they did. I don't think it really says much about them either way.
Okay. I think the Seahawks are so underrated. I'd like this line. It's probably a little high. Tennessee, they're well coached. Vrabel will have them ready to go next week, but I still like the Seahawks in the game. I would probably take the points though in Tennessee. All right, Chiefs Ravens is Sunday night. We'll see what the Ravens look like. If that running game being depleted, no Marcus Peters. They've lost some guys on defense. I know they still have some really good players up front, but I'm a little concerned about their roster construction and what Lamar really has to work with. Chiefs are losing 3. I like Kansas City.
I feel like I like Baltimore, but I want to see what Lamar looks like first. So it'll depend, right? Like, if this line's still available during the game, I kind of want to see how it moves based on how Lamar Jackson looks, because I feel like there's room for him to take a large step forward this year, even with a worse supporting cast, potentially with all the injuries. But like, if he's even a little better as a thrower, he's a legitimate MVP candidate. So if he does look really good, then I feel like this game should be closer to even.
All right, and based on our thoughts from earlier in the show, reacting to the Packers, I love Green Bay -11. It feels about right. That one could be a -12.5, and I'd be okay with it. It's a big bounce back spot for me.
Yeah, I would have thought this would be the longest line of the week. And if there was, I don't actually know. We might have had a look at headline to this one up before week 1 because it is a primetime game. I'm guessing it was about 14, and now it's lower because Green Bay looked so bad. And I don't think you can read much into the fact that Detroit came back in the second half. Like, the Niners stopped trying, essentially. There was nothing that positive about what the Lions did in the second half of the game. Debo, fumble, like you mentioned. I don't think it was like the Lions played terribly and then lucked out that they scored 2 late, basically garbage touchdowns with no chance to win.
Okay, good stuff. That's a look at week 2. Probably went a little longer than we thought, but we're excited, and I think we'll become more disciplined to go through each game. So, admittedly, we were a little long, but that's partly my fault. So, okay, let's look ahead to tonight. Want to start DFS? Does that work for you? We'll start DFS. Sure. We'll pull up the contest here. There is a Millie Maker on the slate tonight. $2.5 million Monday Night Millionaire. The Vegas Raiders hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Let me scroll on up. There we go. Captain play. Who do you like?
So I normally don't like playing the quarterback in the captain slot for GPPs because they tend to be the highest owned guy, and the receivers have more upside relative to like their average games. So Lamar Jackson normally is going to score like 25 points, and he doesn't usually get to 40, right? Like, he's usually in the 20 to 35 range. He's like pretty consistent. A receiver, though, who you'd expect like 12 to 15 points on average from, could go for 27, and that could be any guy in the game. So normally I'm looking to play a receiver in the captain slot because there's more variance in their scores. It's different when Lamar Jackson's involved, though, because he runs so much. And first of all, like, I don't think you can fade him in the flex spot. Like, I'd play him in every lineup. And basically the only reason to not play him, at least in the flex, is if you think he gets injured, or at least like you're planning a lineup around a scenario where he gets injured. Because if he's in the game, he's gonna, like, if he's bad, everyone else on his team will be bad, essentially, is what I'm saying. So he's my favorite captain, but I also think you can play Derek Carr. The problem here is I don't like any of the skill players. Like, I think people will want to go to Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews, and I just don't think these guys are generally good DFS players. So it's Lamar, and if you want the more contrarian play, it's Carr.
Okay.
And I don't really love anyone else. There's a cheaper Raiders receiver that we will talk about that I may like as a sneaky captain pick, but for the most part, I'm sticking to the quarterbacks.
So if you put Lamar in your captain, you've got about $6,300 to spend on your flex spots. If you play Derek Carr in your captain spot, a little bit of savings there, about $7,000 per player to construct your lineup. So something to think about. So you're essentially are you now, if you don't say you do captain Lamar Jackson, do you have to play Derek Carr?
Yeah, I think
so. You want to play both quarterbacks is the question.
Right. I think if you're captaining Lamar Jackson, you're not playing much of anything else from Baltimore, because the path to Lamar being the highest scorer by a significant enough margin where it's actually worth having him a captain. Sure, it could be he throws a couple touchdowns around, but I think it's better to play for the scenario where Lamar rushes. If you're playing the captain, the scenario you want is the one where he actually has a couple rushing touchdowns. And then Tyson Williams and the rest of the Ravens running game doesn't get very involved. Because I think most lineups are probably starting with Lamar. Derek Carr will be in some of them, and then you're going to get a bunch of like 5 to 7K players. And there's an abundance of them for this game. And a lot of them are running backs. The vast majority of them are running backs and receivers. So I think most people just go with like a couple running backs, a couple quarterbacks, a couple receivers, and that's like the chalk lineup. So I'm more inclined, if I'm playing Lamar, I'm trying to fit in Carr, Waller, maybe Jacobs also, and then play some super cheap guys that other people may not have.
Okay, and just to remind everybody, Josh Jacobs, there were concerns about him playing in this game. Illness, trending towards playing tonight. Ian Rappaport, NFL Network, he had that at like 4 o'clock this afternoon. So Jacobs should be in there. Keep that in mind with a Kenyon Drake, who will make his Raiders debut. Kenyon Drake tonight is 7,200. Jacobs is 8,400. You just teased it a second ago. Who's your value guy that you want to play tonight?
So this was true of every single Raiders primetime game of the last 2 years, but I always like Hunter Renfrow, and basically the reason is because other people play Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards, and his ownership is just almost always going to be lower than those guys. He's cheaper than them, but it's basically like the perception of Renfrow is that he's slot receiver who doesn't catch deep passes. He's not very exciting, but if he happens to score a touchdown, he's taking one away from someone else, and it's just like the common lineup is probably going to have at least one of those other two Vegas receivers and not Renfrow. So I like him because I don't actually think he's worse than their other guys. He just isn't the deep threat that they are. And it comes down to a game theory thing where, like, even though he's $2,800, I think because there are so many players in the 5,000s, 6,000s for this game, you won't see too many people playing super cheap players because they just don't need to. Like you said, you have Lamar captain, your average remaining salary is about 6,000 or so. You can just play a bunch of guys that all cost around 6,000. You can play Tyson Williams, you can play Marquise Brown. Maybe you don't get to Mark Andrews, but you play like Bryan Edwards, Sammy Watkins, Henry Ruggs. Like they're all underpriced. So Renfrow is more underpriced, but I think because the other guys are in the same boat as him, most people won't play Renfrow.
Real quick, I want to give a sportsbook pick out before we go. Any interest in touching a Ravens running back?
For sportsbook props or for this?
No, for DFS. Like any interest in Williams or Murray, who just got there?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that I think a lot of other people are going to do the same thing. Okay. Like if Murray were 3% on, let's say, right, like because he's the backup right now. If no one was playing him, I think he'd be an awesome play tonight because I also think Tyson Williams will be popular, but we could see Tyson at 40 and Murray at 10 or 15, and it's just like kind of meh. Like I don't really have a strong take either way on either guy. I think they're both fine, but yeah, it's not that I don't want to go to an uncertain running back situation. That's not really it. It's more just I would rather prioritize the quarterbacks, the tight ends, and then play some off the board receivers instead of that.
Okay, who do you like tonight on the sports book? I am riding Raiders money line. I am a sucker for what they've done on Monday Night Football historically. I know last year's game against the Saints was not a Monday night game. Fans in the building, I have concerns. I don't think it's all about that Ravens running game, but Lamar, I think folks have forgot Lamar's had some COVID issues. I don't know what it's going to look like. If there's a spot for the Raiders to cash in, it's today. I like the Raiders.
I see what you're saying. I'm a little torn on this game personally. Like the hook is appealing on the spread too, to have that 3.5, and it just makes me skeptical.
It was as large as 4.5, and like you said, it's down to 3.5 right now. That's a live line right now on the sports book.
So I'm wondering. Part of my concern, like if you got it at 4.5, I mean that fourth point, most people don't think of as a key number, but like 7 minus 3 is 4. You actually get games ending with a margin of 4 fairly often. So I think what we probably saw there is Josh Jacobs getting that supposed upgrade, and maybe that moved the line by a point. Not that running backs generally matter a ton, but I don't think the Raiders really have much behind him, and Jacobs is pretty important to their offense. They do run the ball a lot. So, I mean, is it a cop-out to say I like the Raiders at plus 4.5 if you have that locked in already?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, that's what I'm going with.
I don't think you're nuts. All right, that's all the time we got. We got to get going. Matt Meiselman, great stuff, man. That was fun. We discussed a lot in 45 minutes. Final thought before we go?
I'm excited to see what Lamar looks like. I know you mentioned the COVID concerns. I have like longer season aspirations for Lamar. Like I think the Ravens could be sneaky, Super Bowl contender this year. I think they might be getting overlooked, but it may not start in week 1. So maybe we're both right.
Yeah, and I think folks that are, I don't think it's fair to read into their running game situation. They'll be fine. They'll figure it out. The concern is what Mark Andrews is going to be heavily targeted tonight. What does Hollywood Brown bring to the table after a down year last year? Hollywood Brown is like the guy who does well week 1 and just disappears. So get on Hollywood Brown if you want. Sammy Watkins, I'm curious to see what it looks like. But yeah, they're asking a lot out of Lamar Jackson once again. So they're becoming Lamar dependent. You can get away with that early in the year. I don't know long term though. That'll be something to monitor. So. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for everyone tuning into the slate. Good luck with your picks tonight, your lineups. Get them in before 8 o'clock or shortly before kickoff at 8:15, I think it is, on ESPN. So enjoy the game. The slate returns tomorrow. Of course, make sure you join us at 11 a.m. on our YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter platforms for the sweat. Jesse and Emerson join you at 11 o'clock tomorrow on all of our DraftKings socials. Thanks so much for watching the slate. Have a good night.